Give us 60 minutes and we'll give you Nelson Radio every Saturday from 2 to 3 p.m. on KTLK AM 1150. With 29 years in the mortgage business and an array of top-level guests visiting the show, Nelson is in a unique position to bring you cutting-edge information on real estate, business, finance, and law. If you have any questions for Nelson or any of his guests, give him a call at 888-888-2136. That's 888-888-2136. Or check him out online at nelsonradio.com.
Nelson Radio.
You're listening to Nelson Radio. Welcome back. I'm excited to be with our special guest, Kelly Johnson from the law offices of Kelly S. Johnson down in Newport Beach. Kelly's an expert in bankruptcy. And there's been, obviously, in this economic cycle, a tremendous upswing of bankruptcies and some poorly executed bankruptcy filings as well. So we're going to look at that. This segment brought to you by our newest sponsor, Lion Air Museum, where we just broadcast last week. The Lion Air Museum down at John Wayne Airport, an incredible tribute to the military aviators. We're going to be back there this April 3rd with our next seminar series for the estate planning law firms. If you want to find out more, give us a call, 888-888-2136. That's 888-888-2136, or you can find us on the web at nelsonradio.com. So, Kelly, welcome to the program. How are you?
Hey, thank you, Nelson. Appreciate it. Glad to be here.
You know, there's a lot of confusion, and we had some conversation about this in terms of not necessarily mistakes, but just bad timing or poor counsel. Maybe it is mistake making in terms of some of the filings out there. And I just wanted some of the basics. I mean, obviously, there's the messaging from a marketing standpoint that bankruptcy sets you free. There's not a worry left in the world once you filed, and that's chasing rainbows, isn't it?
Well, it is. I mean, there's certainly some good things to be accomplished, and typically the people that are seeking bankruptcy protection, they're doing it for a reason. There's some type of triggering event that necessitates the filing. So if there's a good reason to do it, and you can protect your assets and get through the process and get a discharge if it's a Chapter 7 situation, then it makes a lot of sense. But there are downfalls and other issues that arise in terms of protecting assets and exemptions and that type of thing also.
Well, just on the protecting asset side, I mean, everybody thinks that you file, you lose everything, you start over. That's intimidating. If you're middle-aged like Phil or somebody younger like me, it could be even intimidating. But what about your house, your autos, things that you absolutely need? Are those at risk?
Well, depending on the value, and basically it's established by state law. And in California, there's restrictions and limitations with respect to how much equity you can have in a house or in a car at the time you file. For example, in California, there's a $100,000 homestead exemption as the standard rule. If you're older, for example, over 65 or disabled, and there's other specific exceptions too. There you go.
Yeah. Keep talking, Nelson.
You can go up to $175,000 of equity to exempt, and other states, for example, like Florida, have an unlimited homestead exemption.
So when let me just jump in for a second. When we talk about homestead exemption, let's say you are filing bankruptcy, but you do have more than $100,000 in equity. What happens at that point? Are they able to take a certain amount of that? Do you have to sell the home and they take a certain amount of that equity, or how does that work?
Well, the issue is whether or not the Chapter 7 trustee would administer the asset, and that's typically based upon whether or not there'd be a benefit to the creditors of the estate. So if it's maybe $110,000 equity that you would have commissions to be paid and other costs of sale, there'd be no net benefit to the estate. So it's typically a certain amount over that exemption that they would sell the asset and pay the homeowner the exemption amount and then distribute the rest pro rata to creditors. So it just kind of depends on the situation.
Got it.
And what about the bill collectors? Obviously, they're aggressive. I don't know if it seems like they're just some lawless dogs that go fighting and chasing aggressively. Bankruptcy, does that shut down that pursuit of repayment?
It does, Nelson, at least initially. The bankruptcy filing, Bankruptcy Code Section 362, the automatic stay ceases all creditor activity. So it does give you some temporary breathing room. And then if you're able to discharge the unsecured debt through the process, then you won't have to deal with them later. However, you still need to deal with secured debts such as houses and cars that creditors, if you don't pay them, can go against the collateral.
We're with Kelly S. Johnson from the law offices of Kelly S. Johnson down in Newport Beach. This segment brought to you by Lion Air Museum. Lion Air Museum, a tribute to the military aviator. Give us a shout with any questions. 888-888-2136. That's 888-888-2136. Or find out additional information at nelsonradio.com. I had another question, and that is, in your practice, do you see people that are debt abusers as a mainstay? I mean, that's kind of a misnomer. I think it's a misnomer that people that just were careless and frivolous with their debts, they loaded up, they got underwater, and now they have to file. Is it that, or is there some life event that actually triggers a bankruptcy filing?
Well, it usually is something that causes that. There are people that go out and abuse the process. They incur credit card debt beyond their means, in which case the Office of the U.S. Trustee may object to a discharge. The creditor could sue for fraud and try to have the debt deemed non-dischargeable. But usually the people that I'm dealing with are having some type of event that's occurring. It's a foreclosure. It's a lawsuit. It's a bank levy or a garnishment of wages. There's something that happens that causes them to file bankruptcy.
Or maybe medical.
Medical, that's a big part of it, too. People incur medical expenses. There's people who have a company. They guarantee a lease. The company goes out of business. They still owe hundreds of thousands of dollars on a lease over the next couple of years. They can't pay it, and that precipitates filings also.
Phil and I were talking before the broadcast, and it was the question was coming up in terms of, do people wait too long? And I know I was saying to Phil, in the mortgage sector, we see this, and we also see many, many examples of people that have relief available to them that don't act on it. And the example here with the HARP financing, as we're familiar with, right, where only 20% of the eligible community has actually pursued that refinance relief through the HARP program. Does that exist in bankruptcies?
Well, it does to some extent. Unfortunately, people don't realize what their rights are. People try to keep things afloat. They keep trying to pay on a mortgage that maybe they can't afford, a home they can't afford. Unfortunately, I see people burn through $100,000, $200,000 over the course of a couple of years, liquidating IRAs, 401ks, and then they still are in the same position. They can't pay the debts. They lose their home, and then they don't have any retirement at that point.
And those could be protected assets.
Yeah, those would be typically exempt in a Chapter 7 filing if people realize that and don't maybe go as long before they file.
Now, as a follow-up, once somebody does file, how long after the filing until they get their credit history back and until they can kind of rebuild their life?
Yeah, it's a good question, because what typically happens in a normal Chapter 7 filing, and Chapter 13s are a little bit different because it's a restructuring of debt similar to Chapter 11, but on an individual basis. Chapter 7 process typically entails the filing, a meeting of creditors, a 60-day period thereafter that runs, and if creditors don't bring a non-dischargeability claim, then they're able to get the discharge as long as there aren't assets or some type of impropriety in the filing.
Well, you got me. I'm ready.
I'm ready.
But like I tell people, you don't file unless you need to file, and there's typically a reason.
Before we wrap up, I want to ask this question because, like we were talking about, so many people present the bankruptcies as the magic elixir, all problems go away post-bankruptcy. Is there a plan to recover, a plan for people to actually reestablish and get beyond this particular financial season?
Well, there is. And the filings trying to deal with the immediate financial issues, but the whole purpose of filing bankruptcy is to get a fresh start, to be able to move on and move upward. And in any case, if you can go back and reestablish your credit, go get a secured credit card, keep paying on your other debt, and you'll be able to reestablish credit and still go out and get financing. You may pay a little higher rate of interest. You may put a little more down on something, but you see a lot of signs out there. We'll still finance you even if you're in bankruptcy.
Yeah. And that's the encouragement, is that these seasons come up. Kelly Johnson from the law offices of Kelly S. Johnson down in Newport Beach. I want to thank you for being on Nelson Radio. And here's a full scope kind of approach to these seasons come up, where he can handle your case going in and he can guide and direct you going out. Coming up, Coach's Corner next. A must listen. We've got the founder and author of Life Mastery, nationally renowned Christian leader Bob Shank is going to be with us here on Nelson Radio. This segment brought to you by Lion Air Museum. You can give us a call direct, 888-888-2136. That's 888-888-2136. We'll be right back.